Hi, I'm Lauren DiNicenzo, Associate Professor of Organizational Behavior at Drexel LeBow's College of Business.
So, Lauren, I know that there are so many different things as a professor who specializes in organizational behavior that you could focus on. You have focused on team effectiveness. Can you speak to what in your life led you to focus on that particular topic?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I go back all the way to when I was a kid. I've been a part of teams pretty much my whole life, starting from T-ball when I was 5, and I played on basketball and softball and field hockey teams, did a lot of teamwork throughout school. But I've always been or considered myself a team player and really interested in the teaming environment. I'm super competitive as well, but it's not about, how I perform. I just enjoy being in a team setting. And so I've been a part of teams my whole life. Even going into college, I played softball at Cornell University. I was a shortstop, was on teams there. And beyond school, I got into coaching roles and was on the other side of the equation in trying to teach, kids at that point, how do you not only develop your talent when it comes to on the field stuff, but how do you become a better team player? And, very quickly through my experience, realized that as most people do, there are good teams and there are not so good teams. And it's not always the talent that makes a team good or not, but it's the people on the team, the personalities, how they interact. And so I would say, being drawn to this topic, it's been something I've been involved with my whole life. And now to have an opportunity to study it and get to understand more of those dynamics and more of those things that interested me is a pretty neat opportunity.
Yeah, I should say, when you look back, is there anything from those early experiences, playing on teams yourself in sports before getting into the business world and the academic world that stand out as really important lessons learned? You spoke about the people, and the variety, but any personal experiences, stories that you recall?
Yeah, I mean, I always remember being fascinated, and I still am, about human behavior and why people act the way that they do, and in different situations. For example, I consider myself an introvert, but there are certain situations where I can turn it on and I can be, very extroverted and carry a conversation and be involved. But then I knew at the end of the day, I'd be super drained from those experiences. And, anyone who's introverted knows that, big social events, gatherings, don't energize you like they would someone who's introverted or extroverted rather. From my team experiences, I remember two distinct ones. One when I was a player. You always would have high expectations at the beginning of seasons that you were going to do great things, and it was a fresh slate and everyone was going to be on board. But I've been a part of teams where there just was a lot of division and a lot of cliques, and people didn't really get along. But for some reason, we were able to turn it on when it came to on the field performance. And, some of the best years I had playing, we didn't necessarily all get along off the field, but we found a way to make it work on the field. And then as a coach too, you're always looking for the best players. You go out on the recruiting trail and you're looking for, I was a softball coach and I was focused on hitting an infield. So I'd look for, who were the best hitters and didn't have fatal flaws, and who were my smooth infielders who can catch and throw. And, there were a lot of great players out there, but what I found once as I got into coaching, what really set a lot of teams apart were those intangible things. And so I started to shift my recruiting from looking for talent to looking for people who actually could bring some of those team skills. At that level, it was looking for players who could hold their own, who wouldn't go off the handle in a dugout, who weren't always looking to their parents for support, who could be independent and handle things on their own. Even little things from, are you carrying your own bat bag to and from the field? A lot of those things just showed how self-reliant, self-motivated individuals were. So, those kinds of experiences, both from a coach and a player, really fascinated me. And, even when I got into being a coach, we would have votes on who would be our captains from our players. And oftentimes those who got the highest level of votes, weren't always the ones who were the best players. They were the ones who were the most supportive, or the rest of the players could approach. And so I quickly saw that it wasn't always about talent, or the technical skills that people brought to the table, but that it really depended on these interpersonal differences and the personalities that everyone brought.
You said so many fascinating things there I'd love to follow up on, but let me just pick up one, which was that you said there were situations where maybe folks didn't get along off the field, but somehow on the field, they were able to make it work, given that, we live in a time where people feel there's a great deal of conflict in, society, right? And there's tentativeness around talking about a lot of things. What made that difference? What allowed people to have differences off the field, but pull it together on the field?
It's a great question. I think it's one, as you said, I think a lot of teams struggle, just bigger environment challenges as well. Looking back, I think it was that we all bought into the bigger goal that we were after, that everyone wasn't in it for their own personal achievement. And even though we may not interpersonally have got along, people weren't in it for their own statistics. They weren't in it for their own individual achievements. And people really cared about how the team as a whole did. And I think that's one of the challenges we see in teamwork in general in organizations, is you can have individual contributors, and a lot of, there's some work that's done that way, where we just need to do our own thing and pull it together. And there's other times where we really need to rely on others. But I think it comes down to buying into the bigger purpose and the goal of what the team's after, and putting aside the need for individual recognition.
And is that work that the team leader needs to cultivate in team members who may not have that attitude naturally?
So the leader certainly plays a tremendous role, right? The leader can set the stage and really direct attention towards one thing or another. And in a lot of the work I currently do, I often tell leaders that we need to be reminding the team about our collective efforts, our collective goal, our collective vision, and not so much focusing on what everyone is doing. And there certainly is a time and a place to celebrate individual accomplishments, because we want people to feel like what they're doing has meaning and purpose, but it doesn't always have to be on an individual level. Yes, we can give people a pat on the back, but we also need to do that in service of our larger goal, right? Thank you for what you've done. You've really helped to support the team, and you're looking at it from that bigger standpoint.
Boy, I'm going to want to keep you for a lot longer on this conversation. This is interesting. I know that, you specialize in team composition and how that affects many different factors. And I also know you mentioned that you were just involved in a project, or I guess are continuing to be involved in a project with the U.S. Army that is related to all of this. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, so I consider myself an applied researcher. I do things that typical, professors do, and build theory and understand phenomena at a pretty granular level. But I'm really interested how we can apply the things that we learn through research into practice, because for me, that's what matters, right? If we're publishing articles in a journal, it's great, but it needs to get out there as well for others to do things. So like you said, I'm involved in a project currently with the Army Research Institute with some of my colleagues, Mike Kuchenberger from University of New Hampshire and Dale Watson from Penn State Harrisburg, where we're looking at the impact of changes in composition on team performance. So if we think about, the teams that we're on, they're often not composed of the same people over time. We lose people because maybe they move on, they get a promotion, or maybe they're out for an extended period of time. There's a lot of different reasons why team membership can change, just the needs of our team. We don't need a certain skill and we need another skill, so we swap out people. The Army in particular right now is really dealing with some challenges around recruitment, and they've always dealt with needing to adapt to changing situations and changes in how their teams are composed. And so what we're currently doing is designing some lab studies where we can really concentrate and understand and kind of tweak little points in the team, like pulling someone in and out and seeing what happens. How do teams adapt? How do they respond? And then we're also looking to study this in field settings to see, well, what happens when we don't have control over the setting? People are in their natural working environment and they lose a member or gain a member. So we're looking at it from that perspective, but besides the addition and subtraction of people, we also look at it from the growth and development that happens. So we look at changes both within the person as well as between the people, because if you think about teams that you've been on, you may have come in with a certain skill, but because of the people that you're working with, the task you're doing, you yourself have grown in different ways, learn different techniques, skills. And so we're interested in how people learn and grow and change just by simply being a part of a team.
That's fascinating. Is it too soon to say, or is there anything you've learned that is piquing your curiosity right now?
Well, right now we just finished our first lab study, which I have to give kudos to. We have a great team and a great team of PhD students who have done a fantastic job, spent, I think, over 250 hours in our lab collecting data. So we haven't processed it yet, but just from some observations, we've seen some different kinds of results just in terms of how teams respond. So what we had participants do in a lab was come and basically play a computer simulation. We get them used to each other. They play a couple missions together, and then we pull out their most central member, the person they would most rely on for information exchange, and we put somebody else in. And some people very easily integrate that person in and share what they've done before, and others have a much more difficult time and expect that new person to be just like the existing team member. So we don't have our results just yet, but we've definitely seen some interesting differences. So we're pretty excited to see how it pans out.
It's fascinating. I'd love to follow up and see what you come up with. It's really interesting. And I know that a lot has been written about the US military and, the capacity for leadership and team structure and all of that has been recognized as being at a pretty high level and more professionalized than in a lot of other settings. So if we move off the military and talk about, corporate America, for instance, what would you say are some of the biggest mistakes you see organizations make when they're creating and leading teams?
Ooh, this is a good one. I think this is what keeps me in my job and keeps me just coming up with more questions to ask. I think one of the biggest things I see is that when people are promoted into leadership roles and they're asked to lead a team, it's often not because they are good with people, but they're good with doing things, right? They're good at the task, and so they get promoted. And so often there's a mismatch in the skill. And it can be challenging for leaders to take on a role when you're maybe unfamiliar or uncomfortable managing a group. You might not know what to do. And I think some leaders feel like they need to know everything. Like, I'm in this role and I have this position of power now, and I need to know how to be a leader and need to do that. Where I think we need to get away from that. It's okay to not know everything, right? That makes us human. We can't know everything. And the responsibilities of the leader are really great, right? We need to be able to manage the emotions and conflict on our team. We need to be able to get stuff done and execute on the task. We need to be able to plan, strategize, create goals. And that's a lot for leaders to know. And so, a lot of ways that I coach leaders out in the field is to, number one, tell them be humble. It's okay to admit that you don't know everything, and really rely on teams. That's a great thing about teams, is that we have now a group of people who collectively can probably do this really well, but we need to let people shine. So we need to understand the strengths and abilities of our people and allow them the opportunity to lead in different ways. So another kind of stream of my research looks at sharing leadership, and teams that don't just rely on a single leader can actually be more effective, because now you're building on the strengths of all of your individual team members, not just relying on somebody to know everything when we know oftentimes leaders don't, but we can really set our teams up to be effective if we just allow for those strengths of everyone to come through.
I love that. Is that something you see more of these days, or is that kind of pushing the boulder up the mountain?
No, I think we're seeing a lot of it. I'm actually writing a book with a couple of my colleagues as well on this, and how we can share leadership even within hierarchical situations. I talked about the military. We certainly see it there, but we see it in other areas, finance, IT, manufacturing. There's a lot of domains where sharing leadership can be really great, but we have to give people the right kind of tools. So, I like to say that it's about shifting the role of the person in charge, of the leader. Again, the leader doesn't need to know everything, so they don't need to be micromanaging and telling others what to do, but rather they should be thinking about how can they be more of a coach and helping to support and provide resources for their team. Or, if a team member comes to you and has a question, it's okay for you to not have the answers. You can problem solve that together, and encouraging leaders to seek solutions from those who are on the floor actually doing the work. So for a lot, it's about shifting that mindset. But some other work that I've done too, we see that not all leaders are comfortable in being more of a coach or a supportive leader, and feel like they need to have control and power and authority over everything.
Indeed. So everybody's had that experience, right?
Oh yeah.
Um, so this is a slightly different question from what we were just talking about. We were talking about what are some of the biggest mistakes. I'm also curious about what are some of the really common misunderstandings that people have about what leads to an effective team.
So I think that there's not a whole lot of training or understanding around team development, that a lot of people tend to think it's just going to happen naturally, but it's really something that we need to focus on, just like we need to sit down and learn a skill, and learn how to program or learn how to operate a piece of equipment. We need to have training and development on developing relationships, how to build trust, how to communicate, because a lot of these things just aren't natural. And I think that's one of the biggest downfalls, is just not spending time on it. And I mean, rightfully so too. I mean, some people, a lot of us, we usually don't have enough time to get done what we need to get done. And so if we're going to pick and choose what we're going to spend on our time on, it's going to be getting the work done. And that's often the case. And so we push aside these development opportunities, or any kind of situation to learn how to team. But a lot of what I share with those I work with is that if you actually do take the time to learn how to be a better team member, to learn how to communicate and build trust, build those relationships, it can actually make work go a whole lot smoother. And you're not banging your head up against the wall, because you can actually like and enjoy the people that you're working with.
Yeah, it's such an eye-opening observation that you're making, because it seems so true that people assume the team will just work, right? That it
Yeah.
doesn't take cultivation and development and communication. And yeah, it's a great point. You also mentioned the shortage of time issue, which reminds me we are overtime. So let me ask you my last question here. I know from your research, you're also interested in taking a team approach to developing leadership skills. What does that mean? And, are there some practical lessons for the community?
Yeah, I think taking a team approach gets back to the point I made earlier, that the leader doesn't need to know everything, and that I view leadership as a process and not a person. So rather than thinking about the skills or attributes that a leader brings, like being charismatic or easy to talk to or authoritative, it's more about a process. And anybody from any position can lead. You don't need to be that person who has positional authority, who has the leader title. You can be anywhere within an organization, because leadership is about, it's about influence. It's about being able to influence other people. So, I think about taking that team approach to everybody can influence everyone else. And influence is different than just getting the work done, right? We can all kind of be busy bees and doing our work and getting everything done. But if we can step up and help each other and really influence the direction or influence the conversation, that's the way that teams can be most successful. I think we leave a lot on the table when we just look at leadership as a person versus being a process.
Such a great point and such an interesting conversation. Thank you so much. I think this was just fascinating, and I'd love to keep talking, but maybe another time.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. I can talk about this all day. It's such a fascinating topic and so important. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some thoughts.